On Christmas Day, I decorated the house just the way my wife loved it. Gold lights on the porch, our old ornaments on the tree. I cooked the best meal I knew: rosemary roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, pecan pie cooling by the window. This was my first Christmas without Anna. She passed 5 months ago. I was 72, and the weight of the years felt heavier without her. All I wanted was to have my daughter Emma and her husband Lucas at my table. I set out the china, lit the candles, and waited. But instead of the sound of their car in the driveway, a courier walked up my porch with an envelope. Inside was a note that made one thing painfully clear. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd chosen to be somewhere else. The young man couldn't have been more than 20. He wore a red windbreaker, thin gloves, and the kind of impatient look people get when they've got 20 more stops before they can go home. "Delivery for Hans Schmidt?" he asked, eyes glancing past me into the warmth of the house. "Yes," I said, my voice low. He handed me the envelope, nodded once, and turned back down the porch steps. The crunch of his shoes on the frosted path was the only sound until the low cough of his car engine carried him away. The envelope was warm from his hands, but thin. I knew, even before opening it, that it wouldn't hold good news. My fingers stalled on the flap for a moment. I looked at the lights wrapped around the porch railing, the soft glow they cast over the snow slash. Dusted steps, and thought about how Anna would have been standing right behind me, curious. She always wanted to know who was at the door. I broke the seal. Lucas's handwriting, small, perfect looping, sat in the center of the page. Asterisk Hans, we decided to spend Christmas at my mom's this year. Hope you understand. Love, Lucas. Asterisk. That was it. No Merry Christmas. No let's make plans for next week. Not even a phone call before the courier arrived. Understand? I stepped back into the hallway, closing the door against the cold. From here, I could see the dining room glowing under the chandelier. The roast beef rested on its platter, still steaming. The garlic mashed potatoes were creamy and smooth in their serving bowl with a sprig of parsley that Anna would have approved of resting on top. The pecan pie on the counter caught the light from the kitchen. Its crust flaked just right. I'd spent hours on it all, starting 2 days ago marinating the beef, baking the pie the night before, and ironing the tablecloth that only came out on holidays. I'd laid out the china, polished the silver, and folded the napkins into little fans like Anna always did. The candles flickered gently, their light dancing over the crystal glasses. It was exactly the kind of Christmas Anna would have loved. But now it was just me. I poured a glass of sweet tea, sat at the head of the table, and tried to eat. The first bite of roast beef was tender, seasoned, just right, but it might as well have been cardboard. My throat closed up halfway through chewing, and I had to wash it down with tea. After a few bites, I set my fork down. The food didn't taste like anything. I blew out the candles and packed the meal into containers. The pie stayed out. Some part of me couldn't bring myself to wrap it up. Maybe I was holding on to Anna's old habit of leaving dessert just in case someone stopped by, but nobody was stopping by. I knew that. I picked up my phone more for distraction than anything. I wasn't looking for a call or a message. They'd already made their choice. Still, I scrolled. And there it was, Lucas's mother's Facebook post. A long table covered with dishes, wine glasses catching the light. People leaning in toward each other, faces lit with laughter. At the far end, Emma sat next to Lucas, his hand on hers, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "So grateful for a house full of family this Christmas." Grateful. The words sat in my chest like a stone. They were grateful for the table they'd chosen, but not for mine. I stared at the picture until the screen dimmed. I thought back to the Christmas mornings when Emma was small. She'd wake us up at dawn, tearing down the hallway in her pajamas, the smell of cinnamon rolls filling the house. Anna would be in the kitchen, pulling the rolls from the oven, powdered sugar dusting the air. I'd read her the night before Christmas by the fire on Christmas Eve, her head heavy against my shoulder. 4 years, our house was the place for Christmas. After Emma got married, I tried to share the time. 1 year with us, 1 year with them. But slowly, 1 year became, maybe we'll stop by and then we'll see if we have time. I told myself it was just life. Married couples split the holidays, and people get busy. But this, sending a courier on Christmas Day, wasn't busyness. It was a message. I set the phone down, screen facing the table, and leaned back in my chair. The house was too quiet. I could hear the clock in the living room ticking, each second pulling me further from the life I used to have. The fire in the fireplace popped softly, but the sound felt hollow. I looked over at the Christmas tree in the corner. The gold star on top was the one Emma made in 3rd grade. One point had broken off years ago, but Anna always insisted on putting it front and center. "It's perfect as it is," she'd say. I wondered what she would have said about today. Maybe she'd have told me to let it go, to enjoy my dinner and not take it personally. But Anna saw through me too well. She'd have known it wasn't about dinner. It was about what it meant. At some point, I got up and moved to the living room. The recliner creaked as I sat down in the same spot I'd sat every Christmas night for decades. Only now, the other chair, Anna's, sat empty, her knitting basket still resting beside it, a ball of yarn halfway unraveled. I hadn't had the heart to move it. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet road, headlights sweeping across the wall. My first instinct was to think it might be them, changing their minds, but the car kept going. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. I tried to tell myself it was just one holiday. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't an isolated thing. This had been coming for years, and Anna, if she were here, would have told me so. The note from Lucas still sat on the counter where I'd left it. I walked back into the kitchen and picked it up again. His loops and curves looked almost cheerful against the stark white paper. I imagined them writing it. Did Emma even see it before it was sent? Or did Lucas take care of the family communication the way he always did, sparing her the discomfort of saying it herself? The roast beef had cooled completely now. I slid the containers into the fridge, the cold air rushing out as I opened the door. The pie still sat there on the counter, untouched. I didn't cover it. Couldn't. It was nearly 9 o'clock when I gave up pretending to watch television. I turned off the tree lights one string at a time and walked down the hall to my bedroom. On the dresser was a framed photo from our last Christmas with Anna. Emma and Lucas had come that year, though they'd arrived late, already full from eating elsewhere. In the picture, Anna's smile was as warm as ever. Emma was polite. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that photo until my eyes blurred. When I finally lay down, the space beside me was cold, and for the first time in a long time, I admitted to myself they hadn't forgotten me. They'd chosen someone else's table. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not that I'd slept much. My eyes had been open most of the night, staring at the ceiling while the shadows from the tree branches outside swayed against the wall. The Christmas tree lights were still on in the living room. I must have forgotten to switch them off before bed. They cast a soft glow over the furniture, but instead of feeling warm, it made the house look still, like the kind of stillness you get in a photograph. Pretty, but frozen. I didn't make coffee right away. My mind felt too restless to stand still in the kitchen. I pulled on my sweater and stepped outside. The morning air bit at my cheeks, crisp and cold, the kind of cold that stings your lungs when you breathe in too deeply. The yard still wore last night's frost, blades of grass outlined in white, the birdbath frozen over. Anna used to start her mornings out here, no matter the season. She'd walk the little stone path to the garden and check on the bird feeder that hung from the maple tree near the edge of the yard. I never understood it back then. Why bother feeding birds in the middle of winter? But she'd just smile and say, "Because they still need to eat, Hans, even when no one else is watching." I found myself following that path now, my hands shoved deep in my sweater pockets. The feeder swayed gently in the breeze, empty. It was shaped like a little wooden house with a sloped roof. Anna's choice, of course. Said it made the birds feel welcome. I don't know why I reached up to check it. Habit, maybe. But when I touched the wooden frame, my fingers brushed something wedged between the post and the roof. An envelope. It was tucked in so well I almost missed it. The paper was slightly weathered at the edges, but the flap was still sealed. My name was on the front. Just Hans. Not Hans Schmidt. Not Mr. Schmidt. Just the way Anna always wrote it on birthday cards or little notes she'd leave on the fridge. Her handwriting stopped me cold. I ran my thumb over the letters, like I could feel her in them somehow. In the corner, there was a date, nearly 6 months ago, 1 week before she died. My breath came a little quicker. I looked around the yard, like maybe someone else would be standing there telling me what to do, but it was just me, the frost, and the quiet. I carried it back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at it for what felt like a full minute before I opened it. The paper inside was folded neatly, a single page. No greeting, no Merry Christmas, just straight to the point in Anna's unmistakable script. Asterisk if you're reading this, something has happened that I hoped wouldn't. Go to my desk, the top drawer. There's more. Asterisk. That was it. No explanation, no signature. The chair scraped against the floor as I pushed back and walked down the hall to the study. Anna's desk had sat untouched since the day she passed. It still held her pen cup, her reading glasses perched on top of a stack of crossword puzzle books, and a little ceramic dish full of paper clips. I knelt and pulled open the top drawer. At first, all I saw were the usual things: stationery, notepads, and a half-used pack of stamps. But as I ran my hand along the bottom, my fingers caught on something. Taped to the underside of the drawer was another envelope, this one thicker. I peeled it carefully. A small brass key was clipped to the outside with a paper clip. Inside, along with the key, was a folded document and another note in Anna's hand. Asterisk Hans, if Emma ever shuts you out, this will make sense. You'll find everything you need at the place this key opens. It's yours. Always was. You just didn't know it. Asterisk. I leaned back on my heels, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. She knew. She'd seen this coming. The document was a deed, legal-looking, with my name printed in bold. The address was one I didn't recognize, somewhere in a small town about 40 minutes away. Hendersonville. I stood there, staring at it, trying to fit the pieces together. We'd never owned property there. Anna had never mentioned it, not once in all our years together. Why would she keep a place from me? And why tie it to Emma, possibly shutting me out? I turned the key over in my hand. The metal was cool, smooth at the edges, well used but polished clean. I thought about calling someone, maybe Klaus, my neighbor and old friend, but the idea of explaining all this over the phone felt wrong. This was something I needed to see for myself. I set the envelope and key on the desk, went to the bedroom, and pulled out my overnight bag. A change of clothes, a flashlight, my wallet, and the thermos Anna always insisted I take on long drives. I made a quick sandwich, filled the thermos with coffee, and looked at the clock. Just after 9, the winter sun was low, but the roads would be clear enough. As I zipped the bag shut, my eyes landed on the chair in the corner. Draped over the back was Anna's old blue cardigan. She used to wear it while she read in bed, sleeves pushed up, glasses perched on her nose. I reached out and smoothed the fabric. "You thought ahead, didn't you?" I said into the empty room. The drive out of town was quiet. I passed the frozen lake, the hardware store where Anna used to drag me on Saturdays, and miles of bare trees standing like sentries along the road. Hendersonville came into view sooner than I expected. A scattering of small shops, a diner, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. The address led me down a gravel road tucked behind a line of pine trees. I slowed to read the numbers nailed to the mailboxes until one matched the deed. It was a small white house with blue shutters and a stone porch. Not run down, but not showy either. The kind of place that looked settled, like it had been waiting. I parked in the driveway. The front steps creaked under my boots as I climbed them. My hand closed around the key in my pocket. It slid into the lock like it belonged there. When the door clicked open, I hesitated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a room Anna had just left. Inside, the air was warm, faintly scented with cedar and something sweet, maybe from the old wooden furniture. Everything was neat, cared for, like someone had been keeping it ready. In the living room, a wooden mantel held framed photos. Anna and I on our 35th anniversary, another of her on the beach, holding her sandals in one hand, her hair whipping in the wind, and then one I'd never seen before. Anna sitting on this very porch, coffee cup in hand, smiling at someone just out of frame. The couch was the same style we'd had in our first house. The bookshelf held titles I recognized, in the exact order Anna used to arrange them. Mysteries on the top shelf, cookbooks on the bottom. On the coffee table, a folded note lay beside a set of coasters. I picked it up. "This is yours in case they ever forget who you are." No date, no other words. I sat down slowly, the note still in my hand. She wasn't just talking about a house. She meant me, my worth, my place in this family. And she'd built something to make sure I never forgot it. I walked into the kitchen. The cabinets held neatly stacked dishes, the pantry stocked with non-perishables, rice, pasta, canned vegetables. The fridge was unplugged but clean. On the inside of the cabinet door was a grocery list in Anna's handwriting. Coffee, bread, eggs, sugar. 2 chairs sat at the kitchen table, one with a cushion Anna had sewn herself. I reached out and touched the fabric, half expecting it to still be warm. Down the hallway, I found 2 bedrooms. One had a neatly made bed with a quilt folded at the foot. The other was mostly empty except for a few boxes stacked in the corner, labeled Hans's things. I didn't open them. Not yet. Back in the living room, I sat in the armchair by the window and looked out at the yard. There was a birdhouse in the back, another bench under what must be a flower bed come spring. The quiet here wasn't like the quiet at home. This was intentional, peaceful. I thought about yesterday, about the note from Lucas and the photo on Facebook. Here, those things felt smaller, like they belonged to a different world. Anna had known. She'd seen the slow drift, the way visits had grown shorter, the way Lucas answered for Emma more often than she spoke for herself. And instead of confronting it head-on, she'd built a safeguard. She'd given me a place that was mine alone, somewhere no one could take, sell, or claim without my say. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the light shift through the window. Eventually, I stood, locked the door behind me, and drove back toward town. The key rested in my pocket, warm from my hand. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever was coming, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The day after I found the cabin, I couldn't shake it from my mind. I woke up thinking about the note on the coffee table, about Anna's handwriting on the grocery list inside the cabinet door. It was like she'd set a place for me there without ever telling me. I'd driven back home last night, but I hadn't unpacked my bag. The key to the cabin sat on the nightstand, catching the pale morning light. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, feeling the smoothness of the brass. Anna's second note, the one about if Emma ever shuts you out, wasn't leaving my head either. What exactly had she seen, and what else had she put in place that I didn't know about? I made coffee, stood by the kitchen window, and watched the frost melt from the edges of the lawn. My eyes drifted to the house next door. Klaus Weber's old Ford pickup was in the driveway. Klaus was an old friend, a retired lawyer, The kind of man who never missed the Sunday crossword and could quote baseball stats from 30 years ago. If anyone could help me make sense of legal documents or tell me what a hidden deed might mean, it was him. I took a long sip of coffee, set the mug down, and grabbed the envelope with the deed from Anna's desk. Klaus answered his door, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a half-eaten slice of toast. "Hans," he said, eyebrows lifting. "You're up early. Everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "Got a minute?" He stepped aside, motioning me in. His house smelled faintly of wood smoke and buttered toast. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning paper folded neatly in front of him. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it toward him. He pulled out the deed, adjusted his reading glasses, and read in silence for a moment. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharper than I'd seen in years. "Hendersonville," he said. "Nice little place out that way. This is in your name alone. No co-owner listed. Did you know about this before?" I shook my head. "Never even heard of it until yesterday." Klaus tapped the paper. "Well, this is no accident. Your wife set this up to be separate, which means, legally speaking, nobody but you has a claim on it." I leaned back. "Why would she do that?" Klaus gave me a long look. "Why do you think?" I didn't answer right away. The image of Emma and Lucas at that other table on Christmas Day flashed in my mind. The note from Lucas, the Facebook post. Klaus went on, "Hans, people don't hide assets unless they're protecting them, from taxes, from creditors, or family disputes." I frowned. "Family disputes." He folded his hands. "You want me to be blunt? Please." I've seen cases where adult kids or their spouses start pushing for control of property once one parent passes. Sometimes it's out of genuine concern. Other times, not so much. I stared at the deed. Anna had thought ahead, farther than I'd realized. "There's more," I said, pulling out the smaller note from the envelope. I slid it across to him. Klaus read it, then sat back in his chair. "She was making sure you had options. This cabin is yours, no strings attached. If, God forbid, things with Emma get complicated, you've got somewhere to go. Somewhere they can't touch." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She saw it coming. Hans, Anna was smart. She probably noticed things you didn't want to see. I thought about all the times Lucas had spoken for Emma, the way he'd suggested they handle my mail when I had surgery a couple of years ago, how he'd offered to help with the bills when Anna was in the hospital. Help I politely declined. Klaus sipped his coffee. "You should check if there's more. If she went through the trouble of transferring property, she might have set up other protections." I nodded slowly. "I'll start with her files. You need help, I'm around," he said. "And Hans, don't wait too long. If they're the kind to make a move, they won't sit idle forever." I left Klaus's place with a strange mix of gratitude and unease. Gratitude for Anna's foresight, unease for what it implied about my daughter. Back home, I went straight to Anna's study. I opened every drawer, checked behind the books on her shelves, and flipped through her address book. Nothing obvious jumped out. No more keys, no hidden envelopes. But in the bottom drawer, under a stack of old magazines, I found a folder labeled in her handwriting, "Household Private." Inside were copies of tax returns, insurance statements, and a list titled Accounts, Hans. Some had my name as the sole holder. A few had been opened just a few years ago. One entry caught my eye. Benton and Associates, Trust 2941. Beside it, a note in parentheses, "Ask Klaus if needed." Benton and Associates wasn't familiar to me, but the word trust made me pause. I picked up the phone and called Klaus again. "Ever heard of Benton and Associates?" I asked. There was a brief silence, then, "Yeah, Gerald Benton." Old school accountant. Worked with a lot of my clients over the years. Why? His name's in one of Anna's folders. Something about a trust in my name. Klaus whistled low. Now that's interesting. He's still in business downtown. You want me to set up a meeting? I agreed. Klaus said he'd call Benton and get back to me by the afternoon. While I waited, I drove back to the cabin. This time, I opened the boxes labeled Hansa's things. Inside were photo albums, a set of Anna's favorite cookbooks, and a small lockbox. The key to it wasn't in sight. I set the lockbox aside, making a mental note to check it later. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee using the old drip machine that looked like it came from our first apartment. I sat at the table, the grocery list still taped inside the cabinet door, and thought about how intentional all of this felt. Anna hadn't just created a backup plan. She'd built a refuge. Back home again, Klaus called just after 3. "Benton can see you tomorrow morning," he said. "I told him you've got some paperwork your wife left behind." He sounded like he knew what I was talking about. That night, I lay in bed, turning it over in my mind. A hidden cabin, a private trust, Anna's quiet warnings wrapped in simple sentences. I thought of her voice, calm, certain, telling me, "If you ever feel like they're pushing you out, you'll know where to go." I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. By the time morning came, I was ready. I dressed in my best jacket, not because I needed to impress Benton, but because I wanted to walk in looking like a man who still had control of his own life. The office was in a modest brick building above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairwell as I climbed. Inside, the reception area was simple. 2 chairs, a desk, and a wall of filing cabinets. Gerald Benton himself came out to greet me. He was in his late 60s, trim, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Schmidt," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Come on back." His office was lined with bookshelves, each stacked with binders labeled by year. We sat at a small table by the window. "I understand Anna left you some documents," he began. I handed him the folder. He flipped through, nodding at certain pages. "Yes, this is what I thought it might be," he said finally. "Your wife set up a private trust in your name about 5 years ago, separate from any joint accounts. She was very clear about the terms. It's solely under your control, with no successor trustee except you." I blinked. "Why didn't she tell me?" He smiled faintly. "She said she didn't want you to think you needed it, that it was just a just-in-case measure." I sat back, letting that sink in. "How much is in it?" Benton named a figure that made my breath catch. It was more than I'd imagined, enough to keep me secure for years, no matter what happened. "She also left instructions," Benton went on. "Said that if circumstances shifted, her words, not mine, and you felt pressured or shut out, I was to explain the trust to you in full." I thought about Christmas Day, the courier, the empty table, the Facebook post. "Well," I said quietly, "I guess circumstances have shifted." Benton nodded. "I'll prepare the access paperwork. In the meantime, you might want to think about how you want to handle things with your family." I gave a small, humorless laugh. That's the million-dollar question. When I left Benton's office, the winter air felt sharper. But in my pocket was the weight of certainty. Not just the cabin key, but the knowledge that Anna had given me something untouchable. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the back foot. I felt ready. 3 days after I met with Benton, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard tires crunching over the gravel out front. It was mid-morning, a time when my driveway is usually empty. Through the window over the sink, I caught sight of a silver SUV pulling in. Emma's SUV. My grip on the coffee pot tightened. I set it down, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked to the front door. The knock came just as I reached for the knob. 3 short raps, then silence. I opened the door to see Emma standing on the porch, hands stuffed in her jacket pockets. She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Papa." Behind her, in the passenger seat of the idling SUV, Lucas was on his phone. He didn't even glance up. "What brings you here?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She shifted on her feet. "Thought I'd stop by. We haven't talked since Christmas." I leaned on the doorframe. "We could have talked then if you'd been here." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "Yeah, about that. Lucas's mom. Well, it just made sense this year, too." I held up a hand. "No need to explain. I read the note." She cleared her throat. "Right. Well, anyway, I also wanted to check in, see how you're doing, and maybe talk about some things." "Things?" "Yeah, you know, Mama's stuff, the accounts. I was in the garage the other day looking for that old toolbox, and I saw some boxes with paperwork. Figured maybe you could use a hand sorting through it all." There it was. The real reason. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, the way you watch a chess opponent make their first move. "What made you think I needed help with that?" I asked. She hesitated, glanced back at the SUV. "Well, you've got a lot on your plate, and Lucas and I have been talking about maybe helping you manage things, just to make sure it's all in order." "For who?" She blinked. "For you?" "For everyone, really." I stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for her to come in. She walked past me into the living room, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. "Still looks the same," she said. "Some things don't need changing," I replied. We sat, me in my recliner, her on the couch. There was a space between us, the kind you can feel even when you're only a few feet apart. "So," I said, "tell me more about this help you're offering." She shifted again, resting her elbows on her knees. "We just think it might be good to, consolidate things, streamline, maybe move some accounts around. We've been reading about how vulnerable older folks can be to mistakes or scams." I let the silence hang a moment longer than was comfortable. "Older folks, huh? I didn't mean." "No, I think you did." I leaned forward. "Tell me something, Emma. Did you know Lucas forged my name on a $15,000 check a couple of years ago?" Her head jerked up. "What? No. Don't lie." "I know it went to a contractor in Tennessee for one of his rental projects." She looked away, her jaw tightening. That was answer enough. "You weren't checking in on me," I said quietly. "You were checking on what I have." "Papa, it's not like that." "For you, maybe it isn't. But from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like you're trying to take over before you're invited to." She ran a hand over her face. "We just don't want things to get messy down the line." "Messy for who?" She didn't answer. Out the window, Lucas was still in the SUV, his phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't looked at the house once since they'd arrived. "He's not coming in?" I asked. Emma shook her head. "He thought it'd be better if I talked to you alone. He's probably worried I'll say too much." She frowned. "You're overthinking this." I sat back. "No, I'm finally thinking clearly." I let that hang between us. The clock on the wall ticked softly. "I don't need help managing anything," I said at last. "Your mother made sure of that." Her gaze sharpened. "What does that mean?" "It means I've got everything I need, and I intend to keep it that way." For a second, I thought she might push, but then her shoulders slumped. "We just want to make sure you're okay." "I am," I said, for the first time in a while. She stood, smoothing the front of her jacket. "All right. I'll see you soon, then." I followed her to the door. Tell Lucas I said hello. She nodded, stepped out onto the porch, and walked back to the SUV. Lucas leaned over to say something as she climbed in. The engine revved, and they backed out of the driveway without another glance at the house. I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear down the street. Then I closed the door. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as Christmas Day. This was a quiet laced with understanding, about what they wanted and about how far I was willing to go to keep what Anna had given me. I walked to the study, opened the desk drawer, and looked at the cabin key resting there. Just seeing it steadied me. I thought about Benton's words. You might want to think about how you want to handle things with your family. I already knew the answer. Carefully, on my terms. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through Anna's files again, this time with a sharper eye. In one folder, I found a list of contact names, people I recognized and some I didn't. Next to Klaus's name, she'd written trustworthy. Next to Benton's, confidential. And next to a name I didn't know, Dahlia Maller, she'd simply written in case of trouble. I made a note to ask Klaus about her. That night, as I sat in the recliner, the fire crackling low, I realized something. Emma and Lucas weren't going to stop at one visit. This was just the first test to see if I'd let them in, let them start rearranging things under the guise of help. They'd be back, and when they came, I'd be ready. It was the first Thursday in January when I noticed the black sedan. Not parked, not moving, just idling at the curb across from my mailbox. At first, I thought maybe it was a delivery mix-up. But the longer it sat there, the more it felt like it was waiting for something, for someone. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, pretending not to look directly at it. A man in a dark coat sat in the driver's seat, head down, like he was reading something. The windows were tinted just enough to make the whole thing look deliberate. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, he drove off without so much as a glance at the house. I didn't like it. By noon, I had my jacket on and was walking the half-block to Klaus's hardware store. Klaus had been Anna's go-to for every home project for 30 years, and mine for the last 5 months. He knew people. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in. "Hans," he said from behind the counter. "Didn't expect to see you today." "Yeah, well," I said, leaning on the counter. "I saw something this morning I didn't like. Figured you might know if anyone's been asking about me." He raised an eyebrow. "Asking how?" Black sedan, sat out front for a while. The guy inside didn't get out, didn't knock, just waited. Klaus frowned. "Not a plate I recognize, but you know, Emma was in here 2 days ago." I kept my expression even. "What for?" "Something about you needing help getting rid of some old junk. She wanted to know if I had a trailer to haul it. Said you'd probably be downsizing soon." Downsizing? That was a word you use when you're clearing someone out. "Did you tell her anything?" I asked. Klaus shook his head. "Told her if you needed my help, you'd call me yourself." "Good." I took a breath. "You remember that name Anna had in her papers, Dahlia Maller?" Klaus nodded slowly. "Yeah. You thinking of calling her?" "I'm thinking I need to know why Anna wrote in case of trouble next to her name." Klaus reached under the counter, pulled out an old Rolodex, and thumbed through it until he found a card. He slid it across to me. "She's in town. Runs a little private consulting outfit, estate planning, dispute resolution, that kind of thing. Not cheap, but she's the kind of person who knows what people are worth before they even open their mouths." I pocketed the card. "Thanks, Klaus." "Before I left," he added, "Hans, if Emma's making moves, she's not doing it alone. Watch your back." "I intend to." That afternoon, I called the number. A woman's voice answered, calm, clipped, all business. "Maller Consulting." "Is this Dahlia Maller speaking?" My name is Hans Schmidt. You don't know me, but you knew my wife, Anna. There was a pause. Ah, Hans. Yes, I knew Anna. She was very clear about the kind of man you are. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. She had your name in her papers, said in case of trouble. Well, I think trouble's knocking. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small cafe on Main Street. Dahlia was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a leather notebook and a cup of tea. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who notices everything and says only what she means to. Hans, she said, standing to shake my hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Saturday, you said trouble's knocking, she began. Tell me about it. So I did. Christmas, the note, the visit from Emma, the forged check I discovered months earlier, and now the black sedan. She listened without interrupting, jotting the occasional note. When I finished, she said, your daughter and her husband are positioning themselves, first socially, undermining your independence in conversation, then financially, seeking access to accounts, properties, or the perception that you can't manage them. I nodded. And that sedan could be a private investigator, could be a buyer. Either way, it's tied to them. People don't just park outside for no reason. I leaned in. Anna trusted you, so I'll ask you straight. What would you do? She flipped a page in her notebook. Protect the perimeter. Lock down assets. Make a paper trail that shows you're not only competent, but that any changes from here on are your choice and yours alone. We talked for an hour, going over details, property deeds, account signatories, even the cabin Anna had left in her will. At one point, she asked, has anyone besides Emma and Lucas been in the house since Anna passed? I thought back. Only once. A man claiming to be from the utility company said he needed to check the meter inside. I let him in, but he never went near the meter. Dahlia's pen paused. And you didn't call the company to verify? No. She shook her head. That's a breach. From now on, no one in without an appointment and ID. You've confirmed yourself. When we left the cafe, she handed me her card. Hans, I work for clients, not families. That means I'll do what needs to be done, even if it ruffles feathers. That's exactly what I'm looking for. On the walk back to my truck, I saw a black sedan parked a few spaces down. Not the same as the one from my street, but close enough to make my skin prickle. I didn't mention it to Dahlia. Not yet. Back home, I took her advice immediately. Changed the locks. Moved certain files from the desk to a lockbox in the attic. Called the bank to update account alerts so I'd get notified of any unusual activity. That evening, while sorting through Anna's folders again, I found something I'd missed before, a sealed envelope with my name in her handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means you've seen what I saw coming. Trust Dahlia. And don't be afraid to let them think they're winning until you're ready to show them they're not. Asterisk. I sat there for a long time, the fire dying in the hearth, thinking about how well she'd known me, and them. Outside, somewhere down the street, an engine idled for a few seconds before fading into the distance. Trouble wasn't just knocking anymore. It was circling, and I had just found my first real ally. It started with the knock, not the polite three-tap kind. This was sharp, official. I opened the door to find a man in a beige windbreaker holding a clipboard. "Mr. Schmidt?" he asked. "Yes. I'm here to deliver a notice from the county court. You'll want to read it carefully." He handed me a thick envelope and walked away without waiting for a signature. Inside was a petition. Petition for guardianship. My guardianship, filed by Emma Schmidt and Lucas Schmidt. I read the lines twice, then a third time. They claimed I was no longer capable of managing personal or financial affairs due to declining cognitive function. They'd listed examples: an unpaid utility bill, confusion with banking passwords, and an incident of leaving the stove on. Half of it was lies. The other half was half-truths stretched until they snapped. I called Dahlia immediately. She picked up on the second ring. "They've moved faster than I expected," she said after I read her the first paragraph. "Guardianship petitions can be dangerous. They're easier to get than most people think, especially if the court believes you're isolated." "I'm not isolated," I said. "No, but they're building a picture where you are. And unless we get ahead of it, that picture becomes reality in the court's eyes." By noon, I was sitting in her office, the petition spread across her desk. "They've even listed the cabin," I said, tapping the last page, "claiming it's at risk of neglect if left under my control." Dahlia made a small note in her book. "This isn't just about your independence. They want to unlock the assets attached to that cabin, probably as collateral for something else." She stood, crossed to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder. "This is what we do," she said. "We create our paper trail: medical clearance proving you're competent, documented records of you managing your accounts, and witnesses who can testify to your clarity and decision-making." I frowned. "Witnesses?" "Yes. People who can say they've seen you read contracts, make purchases, and manage property without assistance. Every little thing counts. If we give the court a stack of evidence thicker than theirs, we win before the hearing even starts." "And if we lose?" Her eyes met mine. "Then you lose control of everything." "But we're not going to lose." The first stop was the bank. I knew the manager, Mrs. Alvarez. Anna and I had done business with her for years. She greeted me with her usual warmth. "Hans, what can I do for you?" "I need copies of my last 6 months of statements," I said, "and any records showing I've managed transactions personally." She glanced at Dahlia, then back at me. "Is there trouble?" "Family trouble," I said simply. "And I need to show I'm still the one steering this ship." She nodded. "You've been in here every month, making deposits yourself. I can print a record showing that. It'll help." From the bank, we went to Dr. Keller's office, Anna's doctor, my doctor too. He gave me a quick exam, reflexes, memory questions, and a little writing test. When it was done, he leaned back in his chair. "Hans, you're as sharp as I've ever seen you. I'll draft a letter certifying you have full cognitive capacity." "That's exactly what I need, document." On the drive back, Dahlia said, "Now, we need witnesses outside your circle. Neighbors, shop owners, anyone who's interacted with you in a business-like setting recently." I thought for a moment. "There's Ellen at the hardware store and Raj at the grocery. I've been handling all my orders since Anna passed." "Perfect," Dahlia said. "We'll get their statements in writing. The more varied, the better. Makes it harder for Emma and Lucas to claim bias." We stopped by the grocery first. Raj came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands. "Hans, how's the house holding up?" "Well enough," I said. "Listen, I've got a favor to ask." When I explained, his expression hardened. "They're trying to take control of your life. That's not right. I'll write whatever you need. You're here every week with a list, comparing prices, catching mistakes. You're sharper than half the folks I serve." I smiled. "Thanks, Raj." By the end of the day, we had 6 months of bank statements, a doctor's letter certifying my competency, and 3 witness statements from people I did business with. Dahlia stacked the papers neatly. "This is a start. Now, we need to file our response to the petition and attach all of this as exhibits." "When's the hearing?" 2 weeks, she said. "But they'll get a copy of our response in 5 days. That's when they'll realize you're not rolling over." That night, I sat by the fire again, Anna's letter still in the lockbox upstairs. I thought about the phrase she'd written, "Don't be afraid to let them think they're winning." I wondered if Emma and Lucas thought the petition was their masterstroke. Maybe it was, but masterstrokes work both ways. 3 days later, Klaus called me. "Hans, you might want to know, Emma was in here again. Bought a lockbox. Told me she needed to keep important papers safe before a big change in the family." "Did she say what kind of change?" Klaus hesitated. "She said, and I quote, 'Once Papa's affairs are settled, things will move fast.'" I hung up and called Dahlia. "They're not just preparing to win," I said. "They're preparing to move in the second they think they've got it." "Good," she said. "Let them think that. It'll make what's coming hit twice as hard." 2 days before the deadline to respond to the petition, I walked into the clerk's office with Dahlia and handed over a sealed envelope almost as thick as the one I'd been served with. The clerk stamped it, filed it, and handed me a copy. As we stepped back out into the cold January air, Dahlia glanced across the street. There it was again, the black sedan. Only this time, the window rolled down. Emma was in the passenger seat. She looked at me, smiled like she'd already won, and tapped the side of her head. I smiled back because, in that moment, I knew something she didn't. The paper trail was already working against her. 2 days after we filed the response, I was pruning the roses in the front yard, Anna's roses, when I saw a familiar black sedan slow to a stop in front of my house. Emma stepped out, shutting the door harder than she needed to. She didn't even look at the flowers, just walked straight up the path with the kind of quick, tight strides that told me she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head. "Papa," she said, voice clipped. "Emma." The air between us was cold, and not just from January. She held up a thick envelope, my court response. "You think this is going to work?" I set my pruning shears on the porch rail. "I don't know," I said evenly. "But it's the truth. That's all it needs to be." She took another step closer. Her perfume was sharp, too sharp for morning. "You've made this harder than it had to be. Lucas and we could have handled everything. You wouldn't have to worry about bills, repairs." "I'm not worried about bills, Emma," I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "I'm worried about being erased from my own life." For a second, her eyes flickered. But then her jaw tightened again. "You don't know what you're up against." I tilted my head. "Maybe I do. Maybe that's why I've prepared for it." She didn't like that. She held my gaze for a long beat, then turned and walked back to the car without another word. That afternoon, Dahlia called. "They've read it," she said without preamble. "And they're rattled." "How do you know?" "A clerk friend told me Emma was in there this morning, asking about expediting hearings. She's trying to push the date up, which means she's worried about what else you might have." I let the corner of my mouth lift. She should be. 3 days later, Klaus from the hardware store stopped by. "Hans, I probably shouldn't say this, but Lucas was in here yesterday, buying a new lock for a storage unit. He was on the phone, and I overheard something about getting the cabin papers before you move them." I raised an eyebrow. "Storage unit?" Klaus nodded. "Over on Ridgeway, the kind with drive-up access." I called Dahlia immediately. "He's moving something," I said. "Or planning to." "That's fine," Dahlia replied. "Because whatever he thinks he's moving, it's not going to help them." "What do you mean?" "You remember when we set up that trust for the cabin, the one Anna insisted on?" "Yes." "Well, last month I had you sign an amendment transferring the deed from your name directly into the trust's protective clause. It's no longer your asset. It's a separate legal entity. Even if they won guardianship, they wouldn't be able to touch it without a whole different court case." I let out a slow breath. So they're chasing smoke. Exactly. And the more they focus on it, the less they'll see what's going on. That night, I sat in my chair and let my mind drift back to the cabin. Anna and I bought it the summer after Emma was born. It was small then, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it sat on a ridge that caught the evening light in a way that made the whole valley glow. Anna loved it so much she'd hum when we drove up the winding road, the same tune every time. We'd spent decades fixing it up, new roof, wood stove, a wraparound deck. The last thing Anna said about it, months before she passed, was, "Promise me you'll never let it end up in the wrong hands." I promised, and I meant it. A couple of evenings later, I went for a walk to clear my head. As I passed the corner cafe, I saw Lucas through the window, leaning in close to a man I didn't recognize, sliding a folder across the table. The man glanced at it, then nodded. I didn't stop, didn't stare, just kept walking. But the image stayed in my mind all the way home, Lucas passing that folder like it was a baton in a relay race. 2 days after that, the hearing notice arrived, rescheduled for the following Tuesday, less than a week away. I brought it straight to Dahlia's office. "This is good," she said. "It forces them to show their hand sooner. We'll have them reacting instead of dictating." She leaned forward. "Hans, I want you to be ready for one more thing. If they think they're losing, they might try a public play, something to make you look unstable before the hearing." I frowned. "Like what?" "Could be anything. A sudden accusation, an incident they claim happened in front of witnesses. Just don't give them an opening." The next day, I went to the community center for the monthly veterans breakfast. I'd skipped the last few months, but I wanted people to see me, sharp, steady, engaged. It worked. I shook hands, told stories, and even helped organize the raffle tickets. Old friends like Marcus and Eddie laughed with me over burnt coffee, and newcomers listened politely as I talked about the gardening project we'd started back. Every handshake was more than just a greeting. It was a reminder to the room that I was part of this community, not some recluse losing his grip. On my way out, I saw Ellen from the hardware store. "Heard there's some family drama," she said gently. "If you need someone to vouch for you, you know I've got your back." I thanked her. Another piece on the board. That night, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Lucas's voice came through, sweet but brittle. "Hans, I just wanted to say, whatever happens in court, we hope you'll understand. It's for your good." I let the silence stretch. Funny thing about my good Lucas. Usually, I get to decide what that is. His tone hardened. "We'll see what the judge thinks." He hung up. For a long moment, I just sat there. The fire was low, casting shadows on the walls. Upstairs, Anna's letter was still in the lockbox. The cabin trust papers were in Dahlia's safe. And the rest, the part they didn't know about yet, was still in motion. Because while Emma and Lucas were chasing the cabin, I was making sure the rest of my assets, the house, the accounts, even the car, were lined up under the same protective structure. By the time the hearing came, there wouldn't be a single piece of property in my name worth fighting over. That was the part they'd never see coming. The Saturday before the hearing, I found myself parked half a block from Emma's house, engine off, watching the soft winter light spill across their front porch. I wasn't there to spy in the usual sense. I just wanted to see the way they moved when they thought no one was looking. Through the bare branches, I saw Lucas carry a stack of boxes to the SUV, his phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. He was talking fast, nodding to someone I couldn't hear. Emma emerged a moment later, holding what looked like a briefcase. The air between us was cold, and not just from January. She held up a thick envelope, my court response. "You think this is going to work?" I set my pruning shears on the porch rail. "I don't know," I said evenly. "But it's the truth. That's all it needs to be." She took another step closer. Her perfume was sharp, too sharp for morning. "You've made this harder than it had to be. Lucas and we could have handled everything. You wouldn't have to worry about bills, repairs." "I'm not worried about bills, Emma," I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "I'm worried about being erased from my own life." For a second, her eyes flickered. But then her jaw tightened again. "You don't know what you're up against." I tilted my head. "Maybe I do. Maybe that's why I've prepared for it." She didn't like that. She held my gaze for a long beat, then turned and walked back to the car without another word. That afternoon, Dahlia called. "They've read it," she said without preamble. "And they're rattled." "How do you know?" "A clerk friend told me Emma was in there this morning, asking about expediting hearings. She's trying to push the date up, which means she's worried about what else you might have." I let the corner of my mouth lift. She should be. 3 days later, Klaus from the hardware store stopped by. "Hans, I probably shouldn't say this, but Lucas was in here yesterday, buying a new lock for a storage unit. He was on the phone, and I overheard something about getting the cabin papers before you move them." I raised an eyebrow. "Storage unit?" Klaus nodded. "Over on Ridgeway, the kind with drive-up access." I called Dahlia immediately. "He's moving something," I said. "Or planning to." "That's fine," Dahlia replied. "Because whatever he thinks he's moving, it's not going to help them." "What do you mean?" "You remember when we set up that trust for the cabin, the one Anna insisted on?" "Yes." "Well, last month I had you sign an amendment transferring the deed from your name directly into the trust's protective clause. It's no longer your asset. It's a separate legal entity. Even if they won guardianship, they wouldn't be able to touch it without a whole different court case." I let out a slow breath. "So they're chasing smoke." "Exactly. And the more they focus on it, the less they'll see what's going on." That night, I sat in my chair and let my mind drift back to the cabin. Anna and I bought it the summer after Emma was born. It was small then, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it sat on a ridge that caught the evening light in a way that made the whole valley glow. Anna loved it so much she'd hum when we drove up the winding road, the same tune every time. We'd spent decades fixing it up, new roof, wood stove, a wraparound deck. The last thing Anna said about it, months before she passed, was, "Promise me you'll never let it end up in the wrong hands." I promised, and I meant it. A couple of evenings later, I went for a walk to clear my head. As I passed the corner cafe, I saw Lucas through the window, leaning in close to a man I didn't recognize, sliding a folder across the table. The man glanced at it, then nodded. I didn't stop, didn't stare, just kept walking. But the image stayed in my mind all the way home, Lucas passing that folder like it was a baton in a relay race. 2 days after that, the hearing notice arrived, rescheduled for the following Tuesday, less than a week away. I brought it straight to Dahlia's office. "This is good," she said. "It forces them to show their hand sooner. We'll have them reacting instead of dictating." She leaned forward. "Hans, I want you to be ready for one more thing. If they think they're losing, they might try a public play, something to make you look unstable before the hearing." I frowned. "Like what?" "Could be anything. A sudden accusation, an incident they claim happened in front of witnesses. Just don't give them an opening." The next day, I went to the community center for the monthly veterans breakfast. I'd skipped the last few months, but I wanted people to see me, sharp, steady, engaged. It worked. I shook hands, told stories, and even helped organize the raffle tickets. Old friends like Marcus and Eddie laughed with me over burnt coffee, and newcomers listened politely as I talked about the gardening project we'd started back. Every handshake was more than just a greeting. It was a reminder to the room that I was part of this community, not some recluse losing his grip. On my way out, I saw Ellen from the hardware store. "Heard there's some family drama," she said gently. "If you need someone to vouch for you, you know I've got your back." I thanked her. Another piece on the board. That night, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Lucas's voice came through, sweet but brittle. "Hans, I just wanted to say, whatever happens in court, we hope you'll understand. It's for your good." I let the silence stretch. Funny thing about my good Lucas. Usually, I get to decide what that is. His tone hardened. "We'll see what the judge thinks." He hung up. For a long moment, I just sat there. The fire was low, casting shadows on the walls. Upstairs, Anna's letter was still in the lockbox. The cabin trust papers were in Dahlia's safe. And the rest, the part they didn't know about yet, was still in motion. Because while Emma and Lucas were chasing the cabin, I was making sure the rest of my assets, the house, the accounts, even the car, were lined up under the same protective structure. By the time the hearing came, there wouldn't be a single piece of property in my name worth fighting over. That was the part they'd never see coming. The Saturday before the hearing, I found myself parked half a block from Emma's house, engine off, watching the soft winter light spill across their front porch. I wasn't there to spy in the usual sense. I just wanted to see the way they moved when they thought no one was looking. Through the bare branches, I saw Lucas carry a stack of boxes to the SUV, his phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. He was talking fast, nodding to someone I couldn't hear. Emma emerged a moment later, holding what looked like a briefcase. She handed it to him, and they spoke in quick, clipped bursts before going back inside. From where I sat, the scene looked almost mundane, but I'd learned enough to know that ordinary moments often hid the deepest intentions. I stayed just long enough to see them drive off toward the Ridgeway storage facility, the same one Klaus had mentioned. My fingers tapped the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from a slow-burning awareness. They were still convinced the cabin was their ticket. I let them go without following. Instead, I drove home, put the kettle on, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. The fire crackled in the living room. On the page, I began to list every person who'd seen me in the past 2 weeks, at the cafe, the hardware store, the veterans' breakfast, along with the dates and times. It wasn't paranoia. Dahlia had been clear. If they try to paint you as unstable, we'll need credible witnesses who can say otherwise. Dates, times, interactions. The more ordinary, the better. So I wrote them down, even the smallest encounters. Ellen from the hardware store, Marcus at the breakfast, the mailman who chatted about the snowstorm. Each name was a brick in the wall I was building. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Ellen. "Hans, you're not going to believe this, but Lucas was in here today with a clipboard, asking if anyone had noticed you acting confused lately." I kept my tone light. "And what did you tell him?" "That you've been sharper than most folks half your age." I smiled. "Thanks, Ellen. Let him fish. He's in the wrong pond." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the porch, the air sharp in my lungs, and let my eyes wander across the dark yard. Anna used to say, "Winter is when the truth shows itself." Trees stripped bare, no leaves to hide behind. Standing there, I felt the truth as plainly as the frost under my feet. Emma and Lucas weren't looking out for me. They were looking out for themselves. And somewhere along the line, they'd convinced themselves those two things were the same. Monday morning, Dahlia called. "They filed an emergency addendum," she said. "Claims you've been making financially reckless decisions. They're citing the sale of the old pickup and the donation to the Veterans Fund." I almost laughed. "I sold the pickup because I can't drive 2 vehicles at once, and I donated to the fund because I believe in it." "I know," Dahlia said, "but they're trying to spin it as impulsive behavior. We'll counter with proof that those were planned, logical moves." Do you still have the bill of sale for the truck? In the file cabinet, second drawer. Good. Bring it tomorrow. That afternoon, while sorting through the file cabinet, I found something I hadn't looked at in months. A photograph of Anna and me on the cabin deck, taken the summer before Emma got married. Her hair was caught by the wind, her smile easy. Emma had been there that weekend, too, though in the photo she stood off to the side, checking her phone. I remembered thinking even then that she was already drifting into Lucas's orbit. He had a way of pulling people in, making them believe his approval was the most valuable thing they could own. Tuesday evening, as I was locking up for the night, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Emma stood there, hands in her coat pockets. "Papa," she began, "we're hosting a little get-together tomorrow night. Friends, neighbors. Lucas thought you might like to come." I studied her. "Tomorrow night? That's the night before the hearing." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Exactly. A chance to clear the air, show everyone we're all on the same page." The invitation was less about hospitality and more about optics. I could see it plain as the frost on the window. If I showed up and said something they could twist, they'd have their proof. If I didn't show, they'd say I was isolating myself. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I called Dahlia. "Don't go," she advised immediately. "They're setting the stage. Any friendly gathering the night before a hearing isn't friendly." So I didn't go. Instead, I made sure I was seen elsewhere, at the Veterans Center, helping unload donated coats, chatting with people who'd remember exactly where I was. The morning of the gathering, I passed by Emma's Street on my way back from the store. Cars lined the block. Through the window, I saw Lucas in a sharp blazer, laughing with a group of neighbors. Emma was pouring drinks. Now and then, one of them would glance toward the door, like they were waiting for someone. Me, I guessed. I kept driving. The next day, Klaus stopped me outside the post office. "Hans, you missed quite the evening," he said. "Lucas was telling folks you've been having memory slips." Emma looked uncomfortable, but she didn't stop him. I thanked him, though my chest felt tight. It was one thing to suspect they'd try to undercut me. It was another to hear how casually they'd done it. That night, I went through the folder one more time. Every receipt, every notarized document, every statement from friends and neighbors, it was all there. And tucked between the pages was the trust document for the cabin, a silent reminder that not everything they wanted was within reach. Before bed, I wrote a note and slipped it into my inside jacket pocket for the next day. It wasn't for the court. It was for me. For words, Anna would be proud. I wanted to carry them with me, a shield against whatever storm Emma and Lucas were planning to bring into that courtroom. When I finally turned out the light, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel heavy. But tonight, it felt like readiness, like the stillness before a tide turns. Because tomorrow, the lines would be drawn. And this time, I wasn't stepping into their game unprepared. I was bringing my own board, my own rules, and they wouldn't see the last move until it was already made. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. Light filtered in through tall windows, slicing across the polished wooden benches. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Dahlia, my hands folded, eyes on the grain of the table. Across the aisle, Emma and Lucas whispered to their attorney, a slick-haired man in a navy suit who looked like he'd just stepped out of an advertisement for financial services. Lucas's fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the armrest. Emma kept adjusting her scarf, glancing toward me, then away again. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, a woman in her 60s with a steady, unflinching gaze, took her seat. She scanned the docket, then looked directly at the attorneys. "Let's proceed," she said. Emma's attorney went first. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. "Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned for the well-being of Mr. Schmidt. They've observed patterns of erratic decision-making, selling valuable assets, making large donations without consulting family, and most notably attempting to transfer property under questionable circumstances. They fear for his ability to manage his affairs and wish to be appointed as his legal guardians to ensure his safety and preserve his estate. He sat down like he'd just wrapped a closing argument. Lucas reached over and patted his arm as though the performance had been flawless. Dahlia stood slowly, gathering her notes. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Schmidt, has been the target of a calculated attempt to strip him of his autonomy and his property. The so-called patterns cited by the plaintiffs are nothing more than responsible decisions made by a competent adult. We will demonstrate that the claims against him are unfounded and that the real motive here is control, specifically control of a lakeside cabin that has been in Mr. Schmidt's family for decades. The judge nodded. Proceed. We began with the receipts. The sale of the old pickup, a clean bill of sale notarized with the buyer's statement that the transaction had been arranged weeks in advance. Then the donation to the Veterans Fund, documented correspondence showing it had been part of a planned annual contribution, something Anna and I had done for years. Lucas shifted in his seat as each piece of paper slid across the judge's bench. Emma stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Then came the witnesses. Ellen from the hardware store took the stand, recounting how she'd spoken with me multiple times in the past month, each interaction clear and coherent. Marcus from the Veterans Breakfast described me organizing coat donations, handling the sign-in sheets, and even teasing him about his terrible handwriting. Every testimony was a brick in the wall that Dahlia had promised to build. About halfway through, Emma's attorney tried to push back. Mr. Schmidt, isn't it true that you've recently misplaced important documents and had to call your daughter for help? I met his gaze evenly. I misplaced a utility bill. Found it 10 minutes later under the newspaper. If that's grounds for incompetence, Your Honor, then half the state should be in guardianship. A ripple of quiet laughter ran through the courtroom. Even the judge's mouth twitched. But the real turning point came when Dahlia called Klaus. He took the stand, broad-shouldered in his pressed flannel, and swore in. Mr. Weber, Dahlia began, you mentioned to me that you witnessed a conversation at the storage facility involving the plaintiffs. Could you share that with the court? Klaus nodded. Yes, ma'am. I was there dropping off some tools. I overheard Lucas telling Emma that once they had the papers signed, they could list the cabin and split the money before spring. He said, and I quote, "He'll thank us later when he's somewhere safe." The air in the room shifted. Emma's head snapped toward Lucas. Lucas's face flushed crimson. Their attorney objected, but the judge overruled. "Mr. Weber," the judge said, "you're certain of what you heard?" "Clear as day," Klaus replied. "Didn't seem like concern for his well-being to me. Seemed like they were planning a sale." From that point on, the tide was with us. Dahlia walked the judge through the trust documents for the cabin, showing how it was protected from sale without my direct consent. She pointed out the suspicious timing of the concerns, all surfacing right after Lucas learned the cabin wasn't part of the estate they could inherit. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I'm 72 years old. I've worked my whole life, served my country, and paid my bills on time. I am not perfect, but I am capable of making my own decisions. My wife and I built that cabin as a place for family, not as a bargaining chip. If my daughter and son-in-law cannot accept that, that's their choice, but they do not get to take mine. The judge sat back, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mr. Schmidt, based on the evidence and testimony presented, I find no grounds to grant the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order preventing the plaintiffs from interfering with your property or financial decisions. The court strongly advises both parties to seek counseling if they wish to repair their relationship, though I note that is outside the court's jurisdiction." Her gavel came down with a sound that felt to me like a lock sliding into place. Emma's shoulders slumped. Lucas whispered something sharp in her ear, but she didn't look at him. Their attorney began gathering his papers, his expression already moving on to the next case. Dahlia turned to me, her smile small but certain. "It's over," she said. Walking out of that courthouse, the winter sun felt warmer than it had any right to be. The cold air hit my lungs, clean and sharp. I watched Emma and Lucas ahead of us, their steps quick, their heads close together. They didn't look back. Klaus clapped me on the shoulder. "You held your ground, Hans. Anna would be proud." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, the house quiet around me. The legal victory was satisfying, yes, but more than that, it was the knowing, the unshakable truth that I hadn't been erased, that my voice still carried weight. On the counter, the photograph of Anna caught the lamplight. I imagined her smile, not triumphant, but steady, like the lake on a windless morning. I didn't celebrate with champagne or a fancy dinner. I just went to bed knowing that when I woke up, my life was still mine. And for now, that was enough. The morning after the court's decision, I woke before sunrise. Old habits die hard. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet. No phone vibrating on the nightstand. No knock at the door. Just the hum of the furnace and the faint tick of the kitchen clock. I made coffee the way Anna used to, a heaping spoon of grounds, a pinch of cinnamon, a slow pour of hot water. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and familiar. I took the mug to the back porch, where the air was cold enough to sting my face, and watched the first light touch the lake. It looked different now, not because the water had changed, but because I had. The weight I'd carried these past months, the fear of losing not just the cabin but my say in my own life, was gone. Not forgotten, but gone. I had plans for the day. Small ones. I'd promised Klaus I'd meet him at the Veterans Center to help repair a leaky roof. Then maybe I'd stop by the hardware store, see if Ellen still had those cedar planks on sale. Little things, but little things were mine again. Around 9, the phone rang. I recognized the number but didn't answer. The voicemail came through a few minutes later. Emma's voice, clipped and careful. "Papa, we need to talk. Lucas and we made mistakes. Call me." I set the phone down on the counter. I didn't delete the message, but I didn't call back either. Not yet. I'd spent too many months reacting to their moves. Now I was moving on my terms. Later that morning, I drove to the cabin. Snow crunched under the tires as I turned onto the narrow road. The place stood just as I'd left it, pine trees bending under white weight, the porch swept clean from my last visit. I unlocked the door, and the familiar creak of the hinges felt like a greeting. Inside, the air was cold, but the sight warmed me. The quilt Anna had made still lay folded over the couch. The photo of us on the day we broke ground, me in work boots, her in a sun hat, hung by the mantel. I built a fire the old way, stacking kindling just so. The flames caught quickly, snapping and sending up the first ribbons of heat. I sat back, letting it sink into my bones. At noon, Klaus arrived with a thermos of chili and 2 beers. "Figured you'd be here," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "Thought we might christen your freedom." We ate at the kitchen table, steam rising from the bowls. Klaus talked about the roof project, the new guy at the center, and the rumor that Ellen was finally retiring. Normal talk. It felt good. When he left, I walked down to the dock. The lake was half frozen, the ice catching the pale sun. I thought about the winters Anna and I had spent here, skating until our toes went numb, then warming up by the fire. She'd always said this place had a heartbeat. Maybe she was right. Maybe that heartbeat was what kept me fighting. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Emma, from Lucas, handwritten, 3 pages. He wrote about his upbringing, about watching his parents fight over property, about wanting security for him and Emma. He admitted he'd handled things poorly, but never quite apologized. He asked if we could find a way forward. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and put it in the drawer with the rest of the winter firewood receipts. Some things could wait. Because while they were busy thinking about my assets, I'd been thinking about my life. The week after the hearing, I met with Dahlia again. We sat in her office, papers spread across the desk. "You're all squared away, Hans," she said. "The trust is airtight. No one touches the cabin without your say." I nodded. "Good. But I want to take it a step further." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "I want to set it up so that after I'm gone, the cabin becomes a retreat for veterans and their families. No sale, no private ownership. It stays what it's always been, a place for people to feel whole." Her smile was slow but genuine. "That can be done." And that's how I found myself spending January and February not worrying about who might take from me, but building something that would outlast all of us. In March, I hosted the first weekend retreat. 10 vets, some with spouses, a few with kids. We cooked over the fire pit, swapped stories, and fixed the old snowmobile. One night, a young father told me it was the first time in years he'd felt like his family belonged somewhere. I didn't say much, just nodded. But inside, something eased even more. Spring came, and with it an unexpected knock on my cabin door. I opened it to find Emma standing there alone, hands in her jacket pockets. "Papa," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I heard about what you're doing here with the vets. I think it's good." We stood there for a moment, the silence heavy but not sharp. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she added. "Just to say I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to undo what had been done, but it was a start. After she left, I walked down to the dock again. The lake was thawing, the ice breaking into glittering shards. I thought about Anna, about the Christmas that had started this all, about the envelope that had once felt like the end of something. Now I saw it for what it was, the start. The revenge had been quiet, legal, and complete. But the real victory was this, sitting on my dock in my own life, knowing I had chosen every step that led me here. The lake lapped softly against the shore. Somewhere, a loon called, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.